it's past 7 o'clock, and I wanted to get us officially started. And in this group, Reverend Tilley and I co-facilitate uh, the uh, the uh, the Wisdom Circle,
Of Reverend
and
Ike's teachings.
absolutely, and the focus is on Reverend Ike's teachings. And we always, I know when we started, we were doing Reverend Ike lesson sheets one by one, and going through them. And then we added audio into it as well. And so presently in our Wisdom Circle, we are studying one of Reverend Ike's prosperity series called Prosperity and Beyond. So we are focused on prosperity in this Wisdom Circle. And it is a blessing, I think, to everybody who's a part of it. And several of our participants are online with us as well, our regular participants. And so it's a blessing that while we're studying prosperity, we get to include the Reverend Ike biography, the story of Reverend Prosperity himself, if I might call him that. And I did want to say welcome to Xavier and Mark Victor Hansen, and also the co-facilitator, Reverend Barbara Tilley. Reverend Barbara, did you want to say something? We usually open with a prayer. How do you feel about that?
I feel good about praying. We always praying. There's never a time when we're not praying, so perhaps we can open with a type of prayer. It might be a little bit unfamiliar for some, but we just want to be still and know that we are always in the presence of Spirit, and that it is Spirit that has brought us here, that we may find that we have been desiring to become, to manifest, to know. The scripture says, be still and know. So we want to be still and know the divine self that we truly are. And as we listen to, as we contemplate some of the ideas being shared here this evening regarding Reverend Ike, the master teacher of prosperity, we know that this truth that we have always known, that perhaps have been hidden in part from us, will be more clearly revealed. We give thanks for the unfolding of truth, the unfolding of the light and the love, the manifestation in, through, and as us. And it is our desire that all that we have ever been seeking for comes forth into manifestation. And because we desire it to be so, and we prepare ourselves by allowing the space to be there for this knowledge, for this wisdom to come through, we know that it is so. And we give thanks because of it. And so it is. Amen.
Amen.
So
just as a little background, Reverend Tilley, when I was a young child growing up in Reverend Ike's church in Manhattan, I started there. I may have been 5 or 6 years old in the 1970s. Reverend Tilley ultimately, well, first of all, she was in the ministry already. And secondly, Reverend Tilley rose through the ranks. And certainly in the later years, she was essentially the person running the back office of the church. She was the person in charge. So she has an extremely long history with Reverend Ike and a great background. And I'm glad that she's here with me as well. I want to give a shout out. Let's start with Xavier, if you don't mind. Xavier and I are contemporaries. He's about a year older than me, And over the years, I have been a part of his family growing up, and he has been a part of my family growing up. All of my brothers and sisters know Xavier, and Xavier knows all of my brothers and sisters. And we had a great level of familiarity. He is, I will say, truly a brother to me. And his parents were likewise like parents to me as well. So I did want to say that. Xavier, did you want to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first, I want to thank you and Reverend Tilley and everyone who's part of the Wisdom Circle here and the study guide groups and everyone for keeping Reverend Ike's legacy alive and for studying and being inspired by my dad and his work, which it's timeless. And we know it inspires so many people. And yes, Reverend Tilley, I believe it must have been about 1968, was it, when Reverend Tilley first started going to my dad's church over Miracle Temple? Was it, Reverend Tilley?
It wasn't at Miracle Temple. I started going to Reverend Ike Church the second Sunday he was in New York for his New York evangelistic ministry. And at the second service at the Rockland Palace Theater, I think that was about 155th Street in Manhattan, then to the Sunset Theater and on to United Palace for that Easter Sunday that he opened at the United Palace.
There you go. So, as Evan said, becoming administrator of the Science of Living Institute. So I thank you for your participation through the decades in the ministry. And you have been such a faithful support to the ministry and to my family. And Evan, to you, of course, we grew up at the United Palace at the church, and wow, what amazing times. So this is wonderful to come full circle here and be back with you. To talk about the book. So yes, a little bit about myself. I'm Reverend Ike's son, Xavier Eikerenkoetter, and worked closely with my dad all my life, helping to teach and do all kinds of wonderful things and spread the word and spread the truth of God in us. And that is really what it all comes down to. It comes down to God in us. That is the central tenet in my dad's religion and his philosophy. And all of you, if you know, most of you, I'm sure, being well versed in my dad's philosophy, know that it's about God in you and bringing out the divinity within. And when it comes to this book, I want you to understand that this book can be a wonderful tool for your personal growth, for your positive change, for your spiritual evolution. And if you have the study guide, as I know many of you do already, you're going to find that this will flesh out the philosophy with my dad's real world application, so to speak. You're going to see how he developed and applied these principles in his life. And you're going to see how he created the success that he desired through these very principles that you're studying. But you're going to see how they were activated in his life individually. And we're here to tell you that you can, of course, do the same thing for yourself in your way. And my dad was a living example of that. And so, he lived his philosophy, he walked his talk, and I am a living testament to my father's success in my own successful life. I'm a musician, I'm a spoken word artist, I've been a minister for over 40 years, for those of you who don't know me. And I spend my time and my life doing what I want to do, being who I want to be, having what I want to have, as my dad taught us all. So it's an absolute joy to be here and to be sharing this book and this material and these ideas with this extraordinary Reverend Ike fan club.
And I just wanted to add a little bit about Xavier. Xavier is a Ivy League educated individual as well. And he is also a world traveler, and with many great travels to the continent of Africa. Those that's one of the things about Xavier that impresses me. So I just wanted to just add a little bit about that. And then, of course, we want to get to the great Mark Victor Hansen as well, who is the co-author of this book. And I suspect he might be behind some of the ways in which the book is laid out. So, Mr. Hansen, if you could just tell us a little bit something about yourself.
Well, some of you don't know it, but the reason I went to Reverend Ike is that I was bankrupt. I was upside down. I participated in losing $2 million in one day. So I called that my best, worst experience, right? It's not bad. Reverend Ike would teach if you're down. It's only bad if you stay down, as long as you get back up and decide to use your thinking, which he called thinkonomics, as you all know. And right, I went in, two guys and I were working at Dale Carnegie Institute, and they said, let's go up to Washington Heights and go see Reverend Ike. Well, I went in there and it just hit my spiritual spark plug. And for the next 7 years, if I was around on a Sunday, I attended church faithfully. I bought all of his tapes, his books, and all that he recommended. And I even went to all the restaurants that he recommended, and any of the theater, because he loved theater. So he'd recommend something and I'd write it down, make it a goal, and went. Anyhow, my wife likes to say that if it wasn't for Reverend Ike taking me out of the doldrums and taking me out of desultory attitudes, Chicken Soup may not have ever happened. And you can see that I'm the #1 best-selling author in the world, having sold over 500 million books and written 320 books, done $2 billion at retail and $1 billion in licensing, which makes me the #1 guy in licensing, because one weekend I read Steven Spielberg's book and George Lucas's book, and I went into my partner, Dr. Jack Canfield, and I said, Jack, we're going to go in licensing. He said, what do you know? I said, nothing. I said, doesn't matter. It's a system, and I'll read every book that exists in licensing. I'll meet all the people. I'll go to the association. Anyhow, we sold, like last year, 157 million worth of Chicken Soup at the sold dog food. So I really love doing business, but Reverend Ike did what Zig Ziglar would call. He gave people a checkup from the neck up, or I think that's what Zig would say. That's not clearly correct about Ike. Reverend Ike was a soul. I've never said this before, but I'd love any of you to comment, but was a cellular experience. In other words, I think the soul runs a mind, which runs a body, which runs our result. And he got into people's souls. They would walk into United Palace and they could feel the buzz, and then they would start to read his affirmations on the wall, and then they could feel the people in the audience, because he was an electrifying person. And he also wrote his own music. He brought it up. He took Little Lowe's Theater, which we wrote about well, Xavier and I wrote well about in the book. But it's like Jessie Miller, Alfred Miller's wife, said, the organ would just rise from underneath the ground, and it would captivate all the people. And then his show was so good that I remember him telling me one time we're having lunch, and I'd heard him say it's something similar, but I got the highest grossing, longest running show. And I thought, that is like so way cool. Right, that a ministry. I'm not disparaging his ministry, because his ministry touched my heart, soul, mind, and that of my family and kids, and now my grandkids, and a lot of people. Because I would gladly quote his great lines, like, "You can't lose with the stuff I lose and use, and can't lose with the stuff I use." And I would bring entourages of people. Often who were surprised that I would be taking them to see Reverend Ike, and they all had fun. They all fell in love with him. Even today, the people I bought my first properties with out on Long Island will recount to you. They're a very prominent Jewish couple. Said, I can't believe how much I enjoyed him, and how he took us into the well of meditation to get everything we want. And now, she's a yogini and he is a top real estate owner in America. And just, so I brought in a lot of people that would not normally have been invited or felt comfortable, but because I was so comfortable and so loved and so enthralled, my enthusiasm just permeated their willingness to go, and everybody enjoyed them. It was beyond a wonderful experience. I may have over answered your question, Evan. If I did, I apologize.
Well, I just want to say this, I think last year, I knew Mark Victor Hansen. I never actually met him. And one day I was excited that I got a telephone call from the very Mark Victor Hansen. And even though I never met him, certainly not in person, we got on the phone, and it's like I've known him my entire life. We had a fantastic conversation, and because we have a shared experience. He was at Reverend Ike's church in the 70s, and so was I. Now he might have been, just a little bit older than me, but that's another story. But we have a shared experience, being in the same place at the same time, listening to the same minister, and benefiting from Reverend Ike's teachings. And so it is amazing that we have both Xavier and Mark Victor Hansen writing this book. I want to start out with a question for Xavier. We all know that, or if anybody knows Reverend Ike long enough, you'll know that when he grew up, he did not have access to a great deal of material money. I'll put it that way. And we also know that at some point in his life, pretty early on, he encountered great financial success. And so literally, if we might say that he had a life that went from rags to riches, so to speak. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who would like to improve their situation wherever you are in life. Some people may want to acquire greater wealth. And so is there something in this book which lets us know how Reverend Ike did it? What can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. You're going to be thrilled reading this book because you hear, pieces of my dad's life that you've never heard before. And, one of the things I call this book, it's a success manual, it's a self-improvement manual. You could also call it a prosperity manual because you see my dad take the journey from being a poor boy born into the Jim Crow South. And he does certain things that transform himself by the renewing of his mind, of course, and his heart, but starting with his self-concept. And the renewing of that self-concept was something that went against what the world and the times would say to him, that he wasn't worth anything. He used to tell that story about working in a garage, for example. This is one of the stories that did not make it into the book. But plenty of you may have heard this, where he worked in a garage with a white mechanic owned the garage. And once in a while, the mechanic would look at him and say, "Boy," they called him boy. And he was a little boy at the time. He said, "Boy, do you think you'll ever amount to anything?" And my dad would straighten up and look that man in the eye and say, "Yes, sir, I will." And so there was a shift in the self-concept which came from him identifying, we come back to this all the time, that I and my Father, God, are one. He took on and he owned the essence and the power and the presence of God within him. And because he was a child of God, a child of the King, he deserved every good thing. So that's the first key. And you'll see how this works in my father's life and in his spirit. He identifies as a creation, as a child, as a son of God, but as one with God, as someone who is here on this planet to express the goodness that God planted within him. A second key is that because I am one with God, God is my loving Father and wants to give me all the keys to the kingdom so that I can open up all the treasure houses of fulfilling life, of abundance, prosperity, success, loving relationships, creativity, everything that makes life truly good and fulfilling and prosperous. I am going to start to develop my talents because God put those talents within me. And my dad had extremely beautiful talents that he developed from a young age in his preaching, his communicating about spirituality and inspiring and turning people onto this idea of God in us. He was also an incredible faith healer. The chapter on healing is extraordinary. You're absolutely going to love it. And many of you who've been to the United Palace, you know about the healing section and the banks of canes on the wall and walkers and wheelchairs that came in and did not leave. The people left without them, but those implements did not leave. So he developed that talent of healing, the talent of communicating spirituality, and then certain God powers that we all have within us that express individually. For example, the power of imagination. And I know we have some Neville fans here, some were talking earlier, but that power of imagination he developed at a very young age. Imagine he's 5, 6, 7 years old, lying down on his bed, projecting his future on the ceiling and seeing it in full cinemascope, imagining himself living in a big house, throwing lavish parties. I mean, where does that come from? That comes from the unpacking of the divine will that lives within the heart and soul of a person, of every human being. And when we use our imagination to bridge that God power into the world, that's when it pops off. And that's when we're given the power and strength to go to the third key, which is living it in the world. So you'll see Dad take that transition as a little boy, identifying with God and me against all odds of society, of a racist society, against all odds of a mother who unfortunately believed that Black people were put here on the earth to suffer. Yeah, we get into that. You'll see the influence of his parentage. Against the odds of a father who would not support him financially after he and my grandmother split. So yeah, there are powerful keys, and you will be absolutely inspired, and you'll be able to take those keys for yourself. And as I said earlier, it fleshes out the philosophy by showing my father as the living example throughout his entire lifespan of putting these principles into action. And I'm just so excited about those of you who know his teachings well and know him and know the study guide and all the principles, for you to get your hands on this book and see how you can bring this into your own life.
Yes. And, one of the gifts, because you mentioned your father had many talents, one of the talents which I really appreciated about him was his talent of marketing. I mean, he was a master marketing genius as far as I'm concerned. And I also, by the way, Xavier gave me an advanced copy of the book, and I had an opportunity to read it, and I read it word for word, cover to cover. And one of the things that I enjoyed reading about your father, which I don't know that I necessarily knew in advance. Oh boy, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. What I'd like to do though is move to Mark Victor Hansen just for a moment, please, because we're talking about marketing, and I think that somewhere right underneath Reverend Ike in terms of marketing is Mark Victor Hansen, like right there, like Reverend Ike, Mark. Okay. Mr. Hansen, what I wanted to ask you, because, we all know the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series, and we know the wonderful, heartwarming stories that you find in those series of books. And I noticed that there's a parallel between the way the biography was written and the stories that found their way into the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Can you tell me, are you behind any of the structure, the way the book ended up being written?
The answer is yes. And what I'd like to do is I want to add a couple other things. We keep having people want to know where they can pre-order the book. obviously you can go to Amazon, but that isn't the end. What we'd like you to do is go Rev Ike, REVIKE book.com. And we have a whole smorgasbord of gifts to give you. Now, if you want to get those gifts, get a book, type that in at REV Ike book.com. Now, if you want to buy 100 books or more, then Xavier and I are going to have our own mastermind meeting, and we will be talking about in-depth marketing, because business succeeds at two levels. Number one is if you're innovative, and Reverend Ike was innovative to the absolute max. He was an impeccable dresser. He drove extraordinary vehicles, 26 Rolls Royces. He said he'd go in a showroom and it would talk to him and say, buy me, take me home. Same with clothes and shoes and drapes for his great residency. So that is just beyond exciting. And then I want to go way back to hitchhike on just what Xavier said. His dad left him and mom alone, and mom lived with her mom, so his great grandma, but they had to go to school and they were getting master's degrees, and he would pick up a stick and be driving it down the road at 4 o'clock, just like what Xavier said, is that he could see on the ceiling that in the future, not only was he going to have elegant clothes and a great mansion, and he was going to be, have this giant church that was, King Louis the 14th elegant, which most people go, I'm not good enough. And that's why what Xavier said is so important, because he got over all unworthiness. And what our book teaches you is how to break through unworthiness, how to break through self-doubt, how to break through limitation, how to break out of lack and into lots, loads, abundance, and plenty, which he demonstrated. And I thought, wow, he can do it, so I can do it. So in answer to your question, I started out as a mentee, and he was my mentor. Then we became peers. And then, obviously I took off to be world's best-selling book author worldwide. And I think somebody told me that when he was driving around his Rolls Royces, not only did he keep his guidebook in the back of each one of the cars, but he had one of my Chicken Soup for the Soul books, which is really heart-touching. But I was in his infomercial. He called me up and said, I know you've just bought a Rolls Royce Silver Cloud 3. Would you buy my infomercial? And I was more than honored to do that. And we had a lot of good times together at different places in different ways. And I owned a company at one time called Look Who's Talking, and I booked him around. I booked him into other giant ministries. I booked him into our company, which was doing $100 million a year, which I was chairman of, called Enlightened Millionaire Institute, based on this book right here called 1 Minute Millionaire, which is 2 books in one, which was the only book ever to be #1 fiction, nonfiction at the same time. Because what I teach, and I talked to Reverend Ike about, was that to succeed in business and marketing, you got to be original. You got to be transformative, a la what he always taught about. Apostle Paul said, be transformed by the self-renewing of your mind. And it's got to be inevitable that the customer gets not only what they want, but more than they expect. You go the extra mile. And his services did that. The people came in low, despondent, disconsolate, sometimes in rags, and they would go out and they would have just what Xavier said. They had a renewed spirit. They were revitalized. They were reinvigorated. He ignited them and delighted them such that they could go out and make a change in their life. I'd watch people come in 1 week, and then 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, they'd have new clothes, a new outlook, a new job, a new sense of self-esteem, and what Xavier articulately said, self-image, which Ike always taught as, because he was reading Psycho-Cybernetics when I was there in the 70s, you may remember it, and he called it a new self-I-amage, because I am is God's name in nature and universe, and we individualize God's name by saying, I am rich, because he'd say, and Joel had always said, let the weak say I'm strong, let the poor say I'm rich, let the unhealthy say I'm healthy. And if people started to buy into the spirit, that what I was talking about, that souliarness, your soul, and that I've been in the soul business, with books and tapes and audios and videos and films and movies, for 50 years now, and love every minute of it. But he was the major catalyst, turning on the engine of inspiration for me to go onward, upward, goodward, and Godward.
The stories there at the book intertwines the story of Reverend Ike and his experiences growing up and starting his ministry with stories from people who actually benefited from the ministry. And either Xavier or Mark can answer this. Whose idea was it to intertwine Reverend Ike's stories with stories from other people who knew him and loved him?
I think it was ours. I'm going to jump in though and say, you got to share your story, Evan. Just do an abbreviated your story because it's in the book and we love you.
Before I do that, I want to know, it's brilliant, by the way. I love the format. I'd like to know who came up with that.
I think I'm going to have to take more credit on that one than Xavier, although Xavier and I navigated this thing start to finish together. Okay. I've been in the book business a little longer, and he is a extraordinarily, he understates how competent he is as a drummer par excellence, musician, and somewhere down the line when we have these mastermind alliances, you know, and if we have some of the get-together meetings, I've asked him to bring out these gigantic drums that he let Bob Proctor and I play one whole day at his house, and it beats the life out of you, because most people don't let the rhythm of the Kenyan music or the Tanzanian music out. I've been there 4 times, but Xavier's the master maestro on that one.
So to that question, Evan, so, you know, when I started writing, obviously, not long after Dad passed, and I would write some and put the book down, write some, put the book down. And, you know, it was always important, of course, to have people's testimonies in the book. And when Mark came on, he did a number of interviews to expand that idea of having more testimonies and more stories in the book. And I think, I don't remember if it was Mark or Crystal's idea, the way that it was, his wife's idea, maybe the way it was laid out in terms of my narrative and Mark's narrative kind of interweaving, and then other people sharing their stories. But I think it's just a beautiful way of presenting it, because so many people, you know, have testimonies about my dad. And you want to hear, of course, from Mark and me, but you want to also hear from people who have a different experience of my dad. And so that's one of the things I love about the book, is that we're able to share a broad spectrum of people's stories in the book, like yours, and like, well, I wish Reverend Tilley's had made it into the book, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, the editor, you know, for brevity and what had you, had to cut a number of things out of the book. So hopefully you and Reverend Tilley will share some of your story with Dad.
So Xavier, when I remember the thought that I was thinking of earlier, because you mentioned some of your father's talents. And as I was reading the book, it was pointed out to me that he had the ability to visualize, but not just visualize, but see himself in his mind, enjoying the good that he desired to have. And he mentioned in the book, you mentioned that none of his friends could do that. And then, you know, I thought about it, you know, when I visualize, I kind of feel like I'm in the vision, but I kind of see it like through my eyes kind of thing. And then I said, you know, I don't think I'm really seeing myself on the stage of my imagination like your dad did. You know, in order for me to do that effectively, you know, I'm big on Photoshop, right? So I'll get a picture of something that I want to experience, and then I'll take a picture of me and I'll superimpose it in a scene that I want to experience, right? But your father had the gift. He didn't need Photoshop. He could project an image of himself onto the screen of his imagination and see himself doing and being and having the good that he desired.
Not only could he do that, but the other thing he did is he took us all on that trip. Xavier is going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I was never in church on a Sunday that he didn't take us on a brand new visualization, prayerful journey at the end. Am I sort of correct on it, Xavier? Because he would say just what you just said, Evan, is I close my eyes, I open my inner eyes, I see myself on the stage of my imagination. And he could literally this may be language that all of you don't know, but open up the third new eye and see everything that he wanted to have, having his pockets overflowing with money in his investments, money in his home, money so he could travel with class and style. And then he would take you to the beach, and he'd be on the beach and ring, and call up and bring down Chateaubriand for me and whoever I'm with. And you just, all of a sudden, I'd never seen that kind of visualization. I knew how to Photoshop. And when we interviewed, I'm the only guy, as far as I know, that interviewed the 101 best-selling nonfiction fiction authors. I didn't ask how to write. I've been writing pretty successfully, I guess, since I was 16. But I said, how did you sell so many books? Back to your question 3 questions ago. And we whited out. Jack went to Harvard, third in his class at Harvard. He was in the same class with Dr. Scott Peck, a psychiatrist, wrote Less Travel, 58 Weeks, #1. So we whited out the New York Times best-selling list and wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul by Mark and Jack. And we put it on the mirror in my bathroom, Jack's bathroom, my house, his house, our offices. So everybody owned it. And that Photoshopping like that did, because it implodes into the brain down. But I never heard anyone articulate it like you just did. He was living, feeling, seeing, and believing, because he said, he articulated, you got 5 inner senses. You got an outer sense of vision, which most people got, but they never use their inner vision to get the provision that they want.
Yep, that's very true. And we get into certain visualization techniques. There are, broadly speaking, 2 different perspectives. You have the perspective from inside yourself, looking out your own eyes. And that's a lot of what he used and experienced. For example, you remember the old technique, you want a new car, get full of the feeling. And of course, while you're doing this, you're feeling what it's like to sit in the new car, feeling it physically, smelling the new car smell, engaging all the senses Mark just talked about, right? You're hearing, boom, boom, you press the horn, hearing what the horn sounds like. Do you remember, reach on the steering wheel and feel the notches behind the steering wheel, or the seams, depending on what kind of, if it's a leather covered, and they're very specific to get full of that feeling. That's what we want to do, whether with anything that you want to manifest. That's very important. But then the other perspective, as you're saying, as if looking at yourself on a movie screen and you're in the movie, in a 3D movie, more of a storyboard kind of effect, where you see the vision and you see yourself in it from outside yourself, embedded in it, in kind of the way that you're saying with Photoshop. So yeah, you know the visualization tapes and techniques that he created. Just a brilliant series, Your Power of Visualization. Yeah, and that's using that power of imagination. It has been said that imagination is the 5th. Is it the 5th or the 6th? Maybe the 5th dimension. It's not just images in the mind. When you open up that third eye and you go into the realm of imagination, you're going into a different dimension that's beyond the physical. And the magic and the power of it is to learn how to precipitate what is there in that imaginal realm then into the physical. And feeling is what helps to do that seeds the clouds, if you will, so that it will rain in your life. Like we used to sing, I'm expecting a harvest, it's going to rain in my life. And it does that when you see the clouds of the visual imaginal realm with your feeling.
Xavier,
Can I add one thing?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Xavier reminded me that what Reverend Ike did is, I don't think there's ever a visualization, again, either one of you can talk to this, that he didn't finish with healing. I feel myself in optimal health. I'm feeling good, looking good, smelling good, talking good. But the point of healing is that he helped heal people just because they changed their vision of, I'm sick. Everybody in my family has been sick. Everybody's had, I think it was sickle cell or anemia or whatever he said it was, that is so prevalent. So the people bought into that image. Now they bought into an image of high optimized health. And that kind of visualization can only be good for every one of us at any given time, because what Xavier was saying is imagination in these higher realms. And the real definition of Christ, my house has many mansions, is my house has many dimensions. That's how it is in Aramaic. I study with the top Aramaic scholar, Dr. Errico. Anyhow, the point is when you get to those understanding that dimensions, and he lived, moved, and had his existence in those dimensions. So he was, not only was Reverend Ike extremely healthy up until the end, but he saw the divinity of health in other people and could awaken that at the same level that Christ obviously did. If you see the movie The Chosen or the TV show The Chosen, you can see it on YouTube and all that now. And he could heal anyone pretty instantly because he could go into the depth of their soul at an imaginal level, because he said the soul of you, or the divinity of you, has never been poor. The divinity of you has never been unhealthy. And if that's not accurate, Xavier, please correct what I'm saying.
No, you got it. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
I want to know, and I'm sure everybody on the call wants to know as well, and you tell me if I'm impinging on the secrets behind this book. One of the things that impressed me about this book is that it talks about Reverend Ike's childhood in such detail. And I will say that the words, the language that you use create powerful images. I mean, as I read about his childhood, I was transported back to South Carolina, in the house with him. I felt like I was there, and I want to know, and maybe other people want to know too, how can Xavier write about what happened in the 1940s, 1930s, when he didn't come along until the 1960s? How could you write about your father's life in such great detail? If you can reveal as much as you can,
Certainly.
the secret.
Certainly. Well, this is my first book, but I've written a lot of things. So one of the things, those of you who are writers, is that it's important that you sink into your creative space. And again, this has to do with going into that imaginal realm, into that imaginal space that is full of detail, sensorial detail, but also beyond the five senses. And you go to that place of true creativity, whether you're a writer, whether you're a musician, whether you dance or do whatever you do in a creative way. So you're transcending, just rote words, and you're tapping into imagery. Whenever you use imagery in your writing, that's the thing that evokes the same in other people. So if the imagery that I'm using when I'm writing is vivid to me and my feelings are activated, you're going to feel it when you read that page. So part of writing this book for me, it's a combination of things. I had to become a chronicler. I had to go deep into my memory, recalling stories that my father told me, first person. I had to go deep into places of my imagination and feeling what my father must have felt from some of the stories that he told me. But then there's also just the pure collating, of information and stuff that my father wrote about his past and about his childhood and coming up, stuff that he told some of his scribes. Once in a while, when he was in the mood, he would call a scribe and have them write down, aspects of his story. So we had to pull all of those things together. So it's a mix of all of that. Imagination, chronicling, retelling some of his own stories. And, as a writer, you have to be engaged at that deep creative level, because you are creating, you're giving birth to something, and it is all consuming, and you have to be so completely focused on it that everything else just disappears. The same kind of thing when I write my music, or if I'm drumming or doing sacred ceremony, whatever it is, it's got to be vivid and real. Because the recipient, then the reader, is going to feel that.
If I may add, first of all, I want to answer some questions are shooting across the screen. I don't know that we're supposed to answer them or not, but as an outsider, I think I've got the right to answer this. Somebody said, is he a mystic? Now, I guess we should define that, but a mystic is somebody that is steeped in the mysticism and the mystery and a mythology. And Dr. Campbell said, a myth is something that never was and always is. I would go to his place on right above Lincoln Center. I think it was 60th and Broadway, if I've got the address, pretty close, 59th and Broadway, whatever that address is. And he would invite me to meals up there. And the first time I went there, I'll just recall that he was enamored with books. And I thought, oh my gosh, I love every one of these books here. He was exceedingly well read. He was obviously had to be an exceedingly fast reader, and he locked in on it. Now, back to your question about as a child, when he was 4 years old and had no father at home, and his mom and his mom's mom were going to get their master's degree, he would have to walk with them, sit in classes 3 hours a night, and sit there and absorb wisdom. At 4 years old, I don't know how they kept him not getting antsy, but he was taking all the classes that they were taking and absorbing all that. So, he had a learning curve, just like Elon Musk, at a totally different level, and had a great, I will call it an absorbent mind. So did he know the mysteries of the universe and science and theology and math that his mom and grandma were learning? And the answer, in my estimation, and Xavier's allowed to speak differently to this, I think this guy absorbed so much so fast and could also distill it, because genius, which he was, can take the very complex and make it simple so the rest of us can understand it. And he did it in street language. Like, he would teach everybody about money. Do not put your money in a Prince Albert can. And I promise you, that was not something I grew up with, but I instantaneously knew that meant those people were not what we would call a bankable citizen at the time. And he would say, look, you got to have 3 banks, you got to have investment accounts. And he'd take them from no knowledge to awareness, and he called it consciousness, and did a superlative job at it.
Okay. And
Yes.
go ahead,
Yes.
Xavier. You wanted to jump in there?
Oh, yes. Dad is a metaphysician through and through. And, when Mark mentions reading scripture, okay, so it would be blasphemy to say, in some circles, to say that my dad read the Bible as a work of mythology. Now, mythology it doesn't mean lie. It doesn't mean something that's false. It means something that comes from a deep space in the collective human unconscious. And that's why all mythological themes, regardless of what culture you go to, are similar, and all the characters have similar aspects. So you will see Christ-like mythology. You go to any culture and you will find that Christ-like mythology. But the mystic is the one who understands that the story of Christ, for example, is the story of myself, and reads it from that perspective. It's not a book, outside of you, he used to say, written somewhere else, sometime else. No, the power of Christ, as expressed in the Bible stories, lives within me now, lives within you now, lives within everybody who's on this call. We all have access to that Christ power and nature. So that is the mystic approach. It's owning the power.
Let me hit you
One of
just
the
on what he
things
said.
Mr. Mark Victor Hansen, one of the things that you mentioned was, Reverend Ike going to school with his parents and, getting a college level education when he was very young vicariously. There's stories like that in the book, and many of them where people will be able to relate to Reverend Ike on so many different levels. Funny story. I actually went to school, college. I took college classes with my parents. So, when I read that in the book, I just, connected with Reverend Ike on a completely different level. And there are many stories like that in the book. And so many people will be able to connect with it that way. But yes, Mr. Mark Victor Hansen, please.
What he always taught is that a parable is a two-story story. And until I grew up in a Baptist and Lutheran church, I had to go to two churches every Sunday when I was a little kid, because one parent was Lutheran, one parent was Baptist. Anyhow, so I got the old line stuff, the same kind of stuff he got. But then he said, wait a second, there's a whole different story here. You're looking at the story of the prodigal son or prodigal daughter, male and female, and all of us are both. There's the external story. This is what it reads and says, but there's the internal story, which is what Xavier was just alluding to and talking about. And once you understand the internal story, now you are in control of your consciousness. Now you can mold your world like a potter's wheel, like it says in the Bible. A potter wheel goes to whatever the potter's design is, just like water fills whatever vessel it goes into. Like this is, I drink out of glass if I can. The water just conforms to the glass. And what he says is we conform too early to not understanding that every parable is a two-story story. There's the literal meaning, but the more important meaning, at least for me, is he drew out what the other meaning was and explained it and could interpret it with wisdom, which today I wrote my new definition of wisdom, which is right thinking that allows you to eloquently articulate it so you can go take right action.
I can't say, and thank you for that, but I can't say that I saw all the questions that came through in the notes. But this question I saw and I liked. It's from one of our group members, Fabienne, and she's from the continent of Africa. She's from the Ivory Coast. And her question is it possible to estimate how long it took for Reverend Ike to manifest his new life? You know, going from having a financially deprived childhood to becoming financially successful. And before anybody answers that, I think I'd like to have Reverend Tilley jump in. Did you want to jump in, or you want them to answer first?
I want them to answer first. I don't want to jump in at this point. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you look at my dad's story of being in abject poverty, you know, after his mother and father split, there were very painful times. And so, as I said, he developed his connection to spirit, his connection to his own soul as an expression of God, and unpacked his talents. And so one of the great stories in this book you're going to hear, you have never heard this before, was the first time he publicly read scripture. I'm not going to say what it is. I'm going to let you discover that, but it's a gem. So he discovered this power in reading the scripture. And from there, his father, who was also a minister, started saying, hey, you know, my boy's got some talent here, and started, you know, kind of paying attention to my dad after that, and started actually showing him some of the ropes of what it took to be a country minister. So my dad began to take on ministerial gigs, you know, doing weddings and ceremonies, all kinds of special occasions and what have you. And he became to be known as a really good journeyman minister. And from there, you know, his desire just grew, and he kept feeding that desire in his heart and in his soul that emerged so organically to spread this word, this idea of the truth of God within. And you will see the conflict that brings him into with his church circles, because he was very much a maverick and a pioneer of new thought in Black church circles, you know, which you just didn't get that in those days in the South. And so we'll just say he left the church at a certain point and created his own way of going forward. But you see how he begins to take these bold steps of moving, you know, through the South, but then into the Eastern Seaboard and spreading out further into places like Boston and New York. And
how long did it take, though, Xavier? How long would you say it took to go from being that, you know, raggedy tag young man to, you know, successful, prosperous minister?
So let's say by the time he was in his mid-20s, he was becoming quite well known and was building a successful ministry. So you can say anywhere between 11, 15 years in that time span. But it was a build. It was a one, and the thing with this, you'll see him savor each level he gets to. So it's not just about, he's poor and then bang, he's this flamboyant, extremely rich person. It's step by step, and he enjoys, each breakthrough success that he has, from going to New York, for a youth conference when he didn't have the money to get there, and a wonderful, miraculous thing happens to get there that I'm not going to spoil it by saying, but it's a great story. And when you read the book, you'll get the picture. You'll be able to map the years if you want.
Absolutely. And I did want to say that, Reverend Ike, the question is, how long did it take, right? I would suggest to you that he was enjoying all the prosperity that he experienced exoterically on the outside. He was enjoying that on the inside, even when he was a little guy. So, on the outside looking in, you may have seen, he had holes in the bottom of his shoes, I think that you mentioned that experience he had at the mechanic shop, working for the mechanic. I remember him saying he didn't even have shoes on. He was barefoot in the mechanic shop. Didn't even have enough money for that. And the guy asked me, "You ever think you'll amount to anything?" But yes, in his mind, I think he started enjoying great prosperity way before it began to show up.
You're right.
Reverend Tilley, wanted to add
you want
something.
to jump in there?
Yes, I do. I want to perhaps go someplace else. And that, I note that Dr. Tony Mitchell is with us. I'm sure he's muted at this point. But Dr. Tony Mitchell worked with the Reverend Ike, did some sessions at the church, and did some teaching there that was very, very outstanding and powerful in helping people to use their minds to manifest the good that they desire to have. And his techniques were really specific. In that, we hear Dr. Mitchell with Reverend Ike on several of his videos when he was at the church. He goes into great details about how to manifest the good that you desire. I wonder if he would have something that he would like to jump in here with.
You're muted. You're muted, Dr. Mitchell.
Can he unmute himself?
No, he would have to be brought in as a host. Maybe we can.
I've unmuted him, but his microphone wasn't working. Can you try again, Mr. Reverend Mitchell?
Yeah, Dr. Mitchell, if you go down to the left, it says mute. Just click that red line and you'll be unmuted, I hope.
I think he's unmuted, but we're not hearing him.
Okay.
By the way, I believe you picked me up once in a Rolls Royce on Reverend Ike's behalf, and we went to lunch long ago back in Newport Beach. You can't hear.
No.
What to do? We're gonna have to leave him out, but he's certainly one of the iron-pillared persons of this church and this training, and teaching.
So good to see you, Tony. I hope we'll be able to hear you before we.
I enjoy hearing Dr. Mitchell tell stories about his, traveling, and that was one of the great things about Reverend Ike. If you ever were in his neck of the woods, he would, say, "Hey, you're in town. You can call him up," and he'd go out and share a meal, and you get to hang out with him and, in his Rolls Royce, And one of the things that I loved about your dad, Xavier, was that, any place you wanted to go, if you talked to Reverend Ike about it, he would tell you where to go, what to see while you're there, the places to eat, because he was very much so a food guy. That's my philosophy. I know some people are big into food. Well, Reverend Ike was very big into food. If you wanted to know where to go eat, he was the guy to ask.
Now,
Well, my
Theus,
dad was
that's
definitely
that
a
we're
bon
supposed to
vivant.
tell the final story here about Paris. Have you got a good Paris story? One of the two of you, Xavier, have you got a great Paris story?
I don't have that Paris story, but
Well,
my dad was definitely a wonderful bon vivant. That was one of the things I appreciated. It was just fun hanging out with him. One of my favorite pictures, and if I had it here, I would show it to you, is him sitting in the back of his limo with a glass of champagne, looking at the camera and just the biggest smile. But he's so fully enjoyed life, and circling back to this idea, what you articulated something important, Evan. Enjoyment is important for manifestation. Pre-enjoyment is important for manifestation. That's why he taught people the power of visualization. Getting full of the feeling meant that you were enjoying it before you actually physically had it. But that joy is such a powerful magnetic force, and it's gratitude, right? Gratitude is the kind of the central piece of that force that attaches to what it is you want and pulls it into your experience. Because as we know, when you're grateful, when you have gratitude, you magnify and you create more to be grateful for.
So let me just, if Reverend Ike were here, he'd always ask for as much money as you possibly had, $1,000 down to $100, down to 50, down to 10, down to 1. Well, we would love those of you that can afford it to buy 100 books if you can, 50 books if you can, 10 books if you can. And if you're buying 100, remember, go to Cheryl at Rev, R-E-V, Ike, legacy.com. And then you're going to have a private mastermind with Xavier and myself. And we promise you'll get stuff that you could not get anywhere else in the world, inclusive of reading our book. Will take you to the next level of your being. So, and we're pushing, you say, well, why do you push so hard? Well, to make a book sell anymore, because there's so many conflicting interests in the world that to sell a book, you got to sell 20,000 that first week of when the book comes out on December 19th. Otherwise, we'd love you all to go to Amazon and get a book. And if you could do it on the evening of December 18th at midnight or December 19th, that'll help us get over. And we want to become #1 from the get-go, because that causes a residual ricochet effect in the book business, which I've been #1 more than anyone, 59 times. And I promised Xavier and Mrs. Eikerenkoetter that we were going to take this number 60 to #1. And we're inviting you to help us, inviting you to tell other people about it, because the book's going to do you an enormous amount of good. But those of you that can buy extra books and give them to people, I promise you it's going to help people that you can't even imagine, right? And it's going to do good, because thank God for Chicken Soup of the Soul. It has a pass-along value in India of about 12 and about 20 in China, because the government controls the whole book market. So the only way to get it is somebody gets it and they share it. And this is a shareable book, like Evan has been saying all night, because the stories are not our story. It's Reverend Ike's story. It's his legacy, and it'll get inside you, and it'll help you to be all you can be, do all you can do, and have all you can have, so you can live as fully as you can, so you can earn all you can, save all you can, invest all you can, so you can give all you can.
Well, I love that you say that you should buy more than one book. Two things I want to say about that is that when Reverend was alive, selling his tapes, and that you could buy it online as well. But there are some that you can't buy online. And I wish back then that I had bought multiple copies of these valuable resources that Reverend Ike made available, that I might still have some today. Another thing I want to say about buying multiple copies, and I love that idea, is the book is released right before Christmas. Who? And who came up with that? I mean, it's a great gift to give out. And it came out at just the right time for gift giving. So buying multiple copies is great.
And by the way, all of what you said in the first point, that you wish you'd gotten some of that stuff, Reverend Ike's got 60 years of stuff in his archives. And those of you that go to Rev Ike, REVIKE.RevIkeBook.com and give us your email, We're going to tell you how all that stuff, if you buy a book, we're going to give you some stuff that you've never seen before that I promise will wow your soul. And while Xavier grew up under it, I grew up with it, through it, and as it, and have been thrilled during the 3 years writing this, that to get imbued and have it embedded in my mind, because you don't learn it the first time. And it has taken me to new heights of success. And I'm 75 years young, planning on living to be 127th options for renewal. And Reverend Ike was a master maestro of teaching, consciousness, awareness, and higher states of beingness.
Xavier, you want to say anything about buying multiple copies?
Well, yes. I mean, see, if you want to give someone a self-improvement, success, and prosperity manual, what better gift could you give? I mean, and yes, we can thank the publisher for the awesome, release date of December 19th. Of course, it's available on Amazon now, but the physical book will be available December 19th. It will ship from Amazon. The Kindle version also December 19th. You'll be able to download that. But yeah, if you get extra copies, you can give them to people and bless their lives. I mean, remember the prayer cloth? People used to get hundreds of those and send them around, and people, we still get miraculous testimonies about prayer cloths. As a matter of fact, I don't think it made the book, but the rock group Kiss, from back in the day, used to rub my dad's prayer cloth before going out on stage. Can you believe it?
I believe it.
Yeah,
Yes,
you'd be amazed at the circles, that my dad's influence is. That's why the book is called Reverend Ike, An Extraordinary Life of Influence, because his influence was so great and so powerful. The virtue that issued forth, as it speaks of Christ in the Bible, the virtue that issued forth from my dad's consciousness when he was in his place of being tapped into that oneness with God, extended, to millions of people around the world. And his legacy is still touching people. His teachings are still touching people. The energy is alive. And he always said, I will continue teaching from the other side when I leave. And he's doing that. So there it is. I mean, you've got the Wisdom Circle. You've got Revite Legacy, which is, coming into a whole new rebirth. Over a quarter of a million members on the YouTube account at Revite Legacy, and this new book. So and let me tell you, he left so many recordings and teachings. We are going to be unpacking these for decades. So there will never be a shortage of Rev Ike material. And for those things, Evan, that you wished you had bought, they may resurface in the future, because we have the vaults. Believe me, we have storage rooms full of Rev Ike material. And as Mark said, we brought out some of that for the 3 gifts that when you go to revikebook.com, you can have access to. No one has seen these since the time that it was recorded.
You'll love them. Last question.
Reverend Tilley.
Yeah, I would like to encourage everyone to get that book, or to get several copies of that book. I know that I will be doing that because in our study group, one of the things we are aware, like for instance, I have been over the study guide for as many years as it has been in publication. And every time you read it, you get a deeper understanding, a more clear understanding. I know that those lessons that we think we know, that there is still some more that we can learn from those lessons. So now that we go over them the first time, we get the cobwebs off, the dust off our mind, those beliefs that had been bogging us down, that keep us from seeing clearly. We go over them again, you're going to begin to see the brilliancy, the light, the understanding. Not only will you hear these words and they sound good to you, but it's going to stimulate you from a deeper level. The awareness of who you really are is going to really come into focus and will enable you to master those things that you might be having difficulty with. Because a lot of times when people don't understand things, they will say, well, perhaps this don't work, or this is not for me, or maybe I can't have it. We come up with all kind of excuses as to why we can't have the good that we want, rather than to understand that we don't have it in consciousness yet. In our wisdom circle, we teach people how to elevate their consciousness, how to clear away those things that cause them to think that there is, first of all, otherness, that your good is ever absent, and that you can't have it because you already have it. The only thing we don't have is the things that we are not consciously aware of. I might know certain things on a conscious level, but in my deeper subconscious mind, I might have opposing ideas and views there that challenge these new ideas that I want to bring into manifestation. And I find that I get hung up there. But to go into this book and to hear the various examples of how Reverend Ike used those techniques, to hear other people demonstration, is going to help you to remove some of that stuff. It's going to help you to achieve the good that you desire, because the good that you desire is already ready for you. But we have to come more fully aware that it is there. So I encourage you, because people come to me, and I do coaching, spiritual coaching, as part of the ministry that I do. And it's the hang-ups that cause people to think that they can't have, or they can't be. As Reverend Ike said, you can be what you want to be, you can do what you want to do, you can have what you want to have. So to learn how to do that better, even if you have gotten some good and you have not done it all, get the book.
I do want to say this, Xavier, if I might jump in just for a moment and just say this, that I read the book, and you're going to find that there are certain parts of the book that you may read one time and maybe intellectually process, but you may have to go over it. And the part that I'm going to confess that I'm going to be reading over and over again is, because someone asked about what was, I'm intrigued about what led to his awakening, right? Well, one of Reverend Ike's awakenings was, he ran into a lot of people who had physical ailments and problems, and he wanted to be able to help these people. And so literally he went about developing a healing ministry. And would you say, Xavier, that this book could you mimic and follow what Reverend Ike did and develop a healing ministry, if that's your calling, by reading this book?
You can absolutely unpack a lot from this book that pertains to how to heal yourself, and then how to be a vessel that can hold the virtue that will emanate forth and help other people resonate in a space where they can heal themselves. See, that's the key. A lot of people don't know my father was an amazing faith healer, but he would be the first to tell you that I wasn't doing the healing. It's the consciousness moving through me that allowed the other person to touch the hem of the garment and be healed in that moment, because we're taking, as Reverend Tilley was saying, lack and limitation that we have inculcated into us that creates blockages in our subconscious and often in our conscious mind. When we enter a place of high resonance, okay, you got my father preaching, doing what he's doing, he's clear. I and my father are one. I am taking on the mantle of Christ because God told me and promised me that I have that power within me as well. He is aligned with that. He's getting the entire congregation aligned with that, holding their hands toward the person, sending their consciousness, their love, their soul streams, their power to this person. So you are in a field where all possibilities exist. Where two or more are gathered, there I am in your midst. The Christ exists right there. And any and all good can download in that moment. And the person who needs the healing begins to identify. They begin to vibrate at a different level, higher and higher. Every round goes higher and higher. You vibrate higher and higher. You know why? Because the Christ is not going to let their resonance drop. You have to come up. If you're going to be in the presence of Christ, Christ energy, Christ consciousness, Christ love, carried by another human being or congregation of human beings, your choices, you're going to raise or you're going to have to leave. So you will see my Father also. And this is one of my favorite episodes in the book. I mean, that healing chapter is incredible. But you will see him begin to practice. He studies other healers who are doing that. He goes to these country, preachers and ministers and study what they're doing. And he takes it home and he studies and he gets his mind full of it and he practices it. And he starts the laying on of hands on the radio to send this out to people. And you will hear this seminal dynamic account of a woman having this healing by touching the radio. And that happened, frequently. And those of us who were there at the palace saw people get up out of wheelchairs. Dad would take the cane, break it across his leg. They'd go out without the implement, without the walker. And yes, so lots of powerful coaching, lots of powerful methodology and keys that you can use to help heal yourself and help others come into a greater consciousness of their healing.
Now we're going to bring this to a close around 8:30, but I wanted to ask Mark Victor Hansen, do you have a prayer cloth? Did you ever have one?
Absolutely. I probably got more than one. They're little red, and for those of you that don't know what a prayer cloth was, Reverend Ike was reading the Apostle Paul, who, evidently cut up his garments, I guess is what happened. And he did miraculous healings. I mean, Paul, for all of his faults, like originally the Apostle Paul was Lions 10, Christians 0. And then all of a sudden he has this Damascus Road experience, which I think Xavier just articulated really well. If you come into the vibration of the Christ consciousness, if you embrace it, you get stuck there or stay there and then can keep elevating. If you don't, you're going to dismiss yourself. I don't know if that's exactly what Xavier, I know that's what he was saying. Is I never heard it so well articulated, but the Apostle Paul got into that and he had the healing, and it frightened Christians at the front end because he was out killing them, and now suddenly, he's switched sides and he's embracing them, and he was multilingual. He was born in Turkey, but he spoke, if I'm doing it right, 7 languages, and basically wrote a lot of the New Testament, almost half of it, even in jail in Rome, of all places, in handcuffs next to Peter, until the Christ presence was such that it broke that, put the guards to sleep, and he got to ease on down the street, which is miraculous stories. And the last chapter of Allah, what Xavier articulated about being in the Christ awareness, the last chapter of the St. John says, if you knew all the miracles that really happened, it would fill more books than there is room. I mean, that's exactly out of the Bible. So you can go back. And like Reverend Ike always said, I'm in the book, I'm in the book, I'm in the book. And he'd have his book. And I know Tony saw that as much as I did when we sat together a few times. So it is sort of, the guy was miraculous, and Reverend Ike really got the message. I got to be careful in judgment of other people, but he got it. And the people that got in his energy orbit, to say the best, they got it because they got entrained into raising their elevation of awareness. And I think that's why I've sold and marketed so well. And that's why he sold and marketed so well. All of one of your earliest questions tonight, Evan, is it, he said, what is it if I were doing all that I could do, to be all that I could be, to have all that I could have, to inspire all other people to do the same or more, what would that look like? And then he came out with these great ads, which he wrote, and then he ran through his team and then started advertising and filling it. And all of what Xavier was saying, he went on a nondescript church, a white radio station, and it just took off. And then he ultimately been on. Xavier, how many stations was he on? 177. What was the number?
I do not know, but it was
A lot.
hundreds. It was hundreds. That it was, around the world.
Yeah, I mean, he had a big ministry in Africa, and we're, like I said, I've been to Africa a fair amount, and the people there love him, and we think this book will sell as well in Africa. But I want everyone to gain. One of the lines we have in the book is from Al Sharpton, and Al Sharpton said, while Abe Lincoln took the chains off our body, Reverend Ike took the chains off our minds. And right now, the world mind has to have the chains taken off. The world mind's got to come back. We got some people that are trying to do evil in the world. And what we got to do is have those of us that are light bearers and light warriors and light conscious people need to decide to fulfill our missions here on Spaceship Earth. Because I think you got to have 4 freedoms. You got to have money freedoms. You can have time freedoms. You can have relationship freedom. So you can be passionately purpose about your freedom is, because I believe in my wife and I am going to tell another book that the bestseller right now is our book called Ask, Bridge from Your Dreams to Your Destiny. I believe everyone was born with a destiny code, and Reverend Ike hit his destiny code. And once you get one of your destiny codes, like he became a youthful preacher at 14, and people would hang out the windows of the church, and he was preaching 7 nights a week and getting rid of things like tuberculosis and every kind of dis-ease. Everybody came when he showed up in town. Everybody came. The bars emptied and they filled church. So, and we say all that in the book. These stories are just because he was illumined and willing to study all day. And for those of you that don't know poverty, and most of you on this call don't know it unless you're senior to me, he only had one set of shoes, socks, suit, and he'd have to go home at night and his socks were full of sweat because he really was working his little tail off from 6 o'clock at night to 1 or 2 in the morning. And he had to go wash them out, squeeze them out. Hopefully they dried before he went to preach again the next day. And then he'd go into the library or wherever he had to go and read all that stuff about all the most aware healers of the planet. And we've got all of them listed. So you can, if you study what he studied and think what he thought, you'll get there. Like the top leadership guy in the world and I are close friends. We're both Horatio Alger Award winners, John Maxwell. And Dr. Maxwell said, everyone says, John, I want to do what you do. He said, well, to do what I do, you got to do what I did. Well, Reverend Ike did what all the best ministers did. I mean, I'd sit with him and he'd say, I learned this from Oral Roberts. I learned this from Billy Graham. I learned, I can go through the task force of people that he studied with, but he did his homework. He impressed it so he could express it.
All right, Reverend Tilley, I saw you holding up the prayer cloths.
Oh, yes. And by the way, Cheryl has put a note in the chat box. If you would like to have one, you can just request it through her. She has given a mailing address there. So if you contact her with information in the chat box, you can get a prayer cloth.
Very cool.
And Reverend Ike had 2 prayer cloths. One was red, the other one was green. And you might imagine the red was for good health and the green was for
money. Yep, because he believed in green power, not black power, white power, red power, yellow power, green power. In a green economy, you've got to know how to create all the money you want. And that's what he said. He said you can create the life and the lifestyle that you want and that you desire and deserve, but you've got to be dedicated and disciplined.
Right.
Yeah, I carry a green prayer cloth in my wallet to this day.
Good.
Wonderful. Well, since you all, you talked about prosperity and you've been doing studies on prosperity in the circle. We had a great time with our friend and another mentee of my dad's, Kevin Ross, Reverend Kev, at his church yesterday. And the topic was prosperitudes. And I woke up in the middle of the night, before that service, reflecting on that. And what is this about prosperity? What does it actually mean? And it occurred to me, some things came to me in terms of what my dad was tapped into and what I have learned through him and through my own experience. That prosperity has to do with inhabiting your bounty, for one thing. and understanding what your bounty is in order to inhabit it. Your bounty consists of your strengths, your gifts, your talents, your abilities, those things that God packed into you before you came to this earth plane. And it's our responsibility to unpack those things. See, that's how we raise the vibration of this planet, by taking that soul vibration and hitting that tone, by living our best lives and putting it out there. You don't want to hide that light under a bushel basket, because if you do that, the world's going to be darker. You enlighten the world by giving it your full light. See, that is the essence of prosperity, right there. And when you're vibrating at a certain level, things such as money and material things, that just comes. Because you hit a certain vibration where you know, just like Jesus did, multiplying loaves and fishes, I can have whatever I need when I need, whatever I want when I want it. You can manifest it. I mean, that's true prosperity. And Dad used to say,
our sessions is on prosperity and beyond, and it's that beyond piece that we are really looking at, and many of us are working toward coming to the realization that we can demonstrate, just as Jesus did, that we have everything that we need whenever we need it, that we absolutely lack nothing, that we don't need to carry around stuff, because we are the stuff. The stuff is in us.
yes.
I love and bless all of you. I've got to sign off. I humbly apologize.
All right.
Carry on,
Thank
Xavier.
you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Blessings. And just on what you're saying there, Reverend Tilley, see, true success is access to resources.
Right.
And wealth comes from giving of our bounty, right? And from living that out in the world, giving it forth fully. And when we're in that place of giving, it's like we've already, beyond priming the pump, we've already called forth that infinite pump. Dad used to talk about a never-ending cycle of increase and enjoyment. We've already called that down and through us, so that we're focused on flowing it, giving it, inhabiting it in the world, and blessing other people with it. That's true abundance.
Well, we always like to close and end in a timely way. And we typically close the same way we open, with a prayer. And we have various ministers on with us now, but Reverend Tilley, would you mind just taking us out with a closing prayer?
Thank you, Father, Mother God. We thank you as we have had a feast on that you are, on our own self-realization. And we thank you that we know that it is ever expanding, being revealed in us, through us, and as us. And we go forth from this place rejoicing, giving thanks, filled with enthusiasm that we have within us all that we need, all that we desire, all the good that God has been given unto us. And we are aware that it is coming forth into manifestation with ease, quickly, right here and right now. And we give thanks because it is so and cannot be otherwise. Thank you, God. Amen.
Amen. Thank
So
you
it
so
is.
much. We thank everyone that was a part of the Zoom session today. And thank you so much, Xavier, for giving so generously of your time, and your talents, and your presence here today was invaluable, and we really appreciate it, as well as Mark Victor Hansen.
Well, it's been an absolute joy and pleasure to, you, Evan, to Reverend Tilley, and to all of you in the Wisdom Circle and the study guide groups. So appreciate you continuing to be tapped into my dad's ministry and the living word that comes forth from his teachings. It's a living word like the Bible is, because it's about the vibratory essence. It's not about the words, it's about the word. When you get into the vibration, that's when you tap the mystical source of all creation. So I want to thank you for having me. I promise to come back after the book is released, and we can take this from glory to glory. Peace.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
everyone.
Blessings.
Okay.